Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and welcome to another comparison video. Today we're going to be comparing two top-of-the-line closed-back headphones. And we're going to be covering the Z1R from Sony and the Sennheiser HD820. The HD820 comes in at a premium over this, I think $300, $400, something like that. This is about $2,000, and this is about $2,400. Both very expensive closed-back headphones. And what makes this a more interesting comparison here is the kind of general sound signatures that both of these have. They're actually both V and or U-shaped headphones. So they got an emphasis in the bass response, a little bit of a dip in the mids, and a little bit of an emphasis in the treble response. Now, before we get any further, I do want to send a huge thank you to Nima for sending out the HD820 and my friend Israel for sending out the Z1R. And I do want to make my biases here right off the bat. I like the Z1R, I don't like the HD820. And today I'm going to be kind of explaining the reason why I like one particular headphone of a similar sound signature over another. So right before we get into the first category, which is going to be build, I do want to make a disclosure that when I'm talking about like the bass response or the imaging or the treble or whatever it happens to be, I'm talking about a closed system between these two only, not how they exist in the market. So if I say that, you know, this is bass light, I don't mean this is a bass light headphone in the entire market. I just mean compared to this, it might be bass light, for example. Okay, so build. Quality I'm going to give to the Z1R. It feels like a more premium headphone when you pick it up. This kind of feels a little bit plasticky, but there's a lot more to build than just that. For comfort and long listening times, I'm absolutely going to give it to the HD820. It is a lighter weight headphone, at least by the feel of it. It sits more comfortably on my head, even though that's a comfortable headphone. This just kind of rests on it and just feels like it's just kind of on top of your head and kind of just laying there, whereas this feels a little bit more clampy and the pads get a little bit hotter. Now, one other feature of build, which I normally wouldn't bring up, but it is kind of a bigger deal when you're talking about an 800 or an 820. The cable replacements are a lot cheaper on the Z1R here. This uses a dual 3.5 millimeter, so you can buy a really cheap one for like $5 on Amazon if you want to. It's really hard to find good quality cheap cables for the HD820. They're usually really expensive. Normally that wouldn't be a big consideration here, but with a headphone like this, I think some people are going to be buying this no problem, but a lot of people are going to be like saving their pennies to buy a headphone of this caliber. And you'll want to be aware that in the future, you're going to possibly have to replace things. And one of the things that you most often going to have to replace is going to be the cable. And in this particular circumstance, I thought it was worth mentioning. Okay, another category that I wouldn't normally bring up is going to be amplifier pairing. Now, efficiency doesn't always mean less revealing. In this particular circumstance, it is true though. It is still a revealing headphone. Like it will show you whatever year you are putting through it, even though it's a pretty efficient headphone as it stands by itself. But in comparison, the 820 is far more revealing and is going to benefit or detriment you depending on which amps you choose to pair it with. And it is going to be a little bit more picky in terms of which amps. So some amps you're going to have a really fun time with this. Other times you're not going to have a good time. Okay, now I want to talk about imaging and Soundstage. 820 all day, every day. It is far and ahead better for mostly soundstaging than the Z1R. They're both pretty good for imaging, but because of the sound field being so much wider and broader on the 820, the imaging is really able to take a lot of advantage of that. And it doesn't really have any weak points. And like I said in the 820 review, this is a top of the line, best in class gaming headphone for a closed back headphone. Now, $2,400 for a gaming headphone, I'm not recommending it, but if you're looking for the absolute best of the best and you can pay for it, 820 for gaming is the best. Now the Z1R, I don't want it to make out like it is a bad headphone for imaging and soundstage, but it kind of is when you compare it to the 820. The 820 is very impressive, and what Sennheiser was able to do with the soundstaging is really, really good on this particular headphone. And then I'll move into treble, which is going to be actually another benefit to the 820. But as many benefits as we're talking about now, we're going to be talking about some detriments in the future. It's a little bit too forward for my preferences. And this is also a more treble forward headphone compared to kind of the upper mid range. It does have a little bit of extra spice to the treble than maybe some people might like, especially if you like a really dark headphone. but the quantifiable information on the 820 is just superior. The timbre characteristics seem to be about on par with either, when we're talking about the treble at least. And I find the 820 to be a superior headphone for technicality in the treble response, and kind of superior for just raw performing capability. That being said, I personally prefer the smoother treble response of the Z1R. It's not a smooth treble response as a headphone itself, but like I said, in comparison, it's a little bit smoother, and I actually prefer that just towards my personal preferences. Okay, so mid-range, and I don't know if you guys know this, but I take notes. I take like bullet points of stuff I want to talk about, a little notepad right over here. For mid-range, I just have Z1R. That's all I wrote. The mid-range on the 820 sucks. It sucks at any price. It's not a good headphone for mid-range. It just is not. Vocals have no presence whatsoever. And what's funny is that even though the Z1R, and we're going to talk about the Z1R for just a second here alone, the Z1R, even though it's a V-shaped headphone, I still feel like it is a very complete sound signature. It's got a good amount of soundstage, it's got a good amount of imaging, and even though it is a little bit more focused in the treble and a little bit more focused in the bass than it is in the mids, I really, really like the mids. They're forward enough, they separate well enough, and they are clear enough, and they have a good body to them. And they still have kind of that low end grunt for the vocals and kind of a thin, angelic, well, thin sounds bad. I mean thin in a good way here, but it kind of has this angelic top end mid-range for the females. And it just sounds so pleasing to me. And I love it for that. Even though it's V-shaped, I still think that the mid-range is still a decent performer, even though there are some emphases in other categories. And it almost is like it's separated from those other two categories. Let's put this headphone for a side and just talk about the 820. Because the 820 is, its biggest problem is the mid-range. And unfortunately, the mid-range here is so bad that it actually makes the headphone feel dead. It feels lifeless. It doesn't feel dynamic. It doesn't feel rich. It doesn't feel quality to me. It just kind of sounds bleh. It sounds bland. And I think most of that is due to the severe, more severe than the Z1R mid-range kind of recession that it has. It's more of a U-shaped, whereas the Z1R is kind of like a checkmark shape where it's got a little bit of a boost in the bass, and then it kind of dips down towards the upper mid-range, lower treble, and then kind of peaks up again in the treble response. This is kind of like it's got bass, and then it drops off, and then low mid-range, and then boosts back up. So it's kind of like a U shape, as opposed to the kind of checkmark shape of the Z1R. So definitely a big plus to the Z1R. It is able to fill out music. It sounds rich, it sounds fulfilling, and this as an overall headphone, unfortunately, sounds a little bit dead. Now, bass response. Bass response here, I think, is worth about $500 at max. It is good. It is not, a $500 headphone is a very expensive headphone. I shouldn't say as if $500 equals poor response, but it doesn't feel like $2,400 to me. Z1R feels like $2,400 a bass or $2,000 a bass, whatever. It feels like top of the line bass response. It is clear, it is transparent. You can see the other music. It is not bloated, it is not boxy. It is what you pay for. It is one of the best features of this headphone, and it does it super well. Not so well on the 820. I don't like the bass response that much on the 820. Like I said, it's good. It's actually more than on the 800. It's more than what I anticipated it would be when this first showed up, but it's just not there for the quality. Okay, so my preference is obviously the Z1R, right? I said that in the beginning, I made that clear, but I also didn't want to falsify or lie about any sound signature, and I try to be very fair in my analysis here. Although it is important for me also to bring up my personal preference in a comparison like this. The 820 does have some things similar to the 800S that are just better than other headphones. They are just simply better. And in fact, in some cases, they are the best, especially when it comes to soundstage, imaging, and layering. For a closed back headphone, this, as far as I've heard, is the best that you can buy. It is the best for that. And that shouldn't be understated. That is a very important part and actually matters more than other things to certain people. they prefer Soundstage over everything else. And I'm not gonna hate on anybody's preference for that. I think imaging and Soundstage are very important, but I think that everything has to kind of play into a complete mix. I think it has to be a complete headphone for me to really, really enjoy it personally. But as far as kind of a technical breakdown, I don't really think that this headphone competes at the price range. I would be much more comfortable paying like $1,000 for this as a complete package between the build quality and the sound quality. I think $1,000 is a little bit more fair, but I think the Z1R is just on another level of sound, especially when it comes to a more enjoyable and kind of fulfilled, rich sound. Some people are going to consider it too flavored or too kind of vibrant. And I think that's a fair assessment. It is a little bit vibrant, but I like my music to sound alive. I like it to sound rich and fulfilling. And kind of the dead sound of the 820, I'm just not a huge fan of. So that's going to be the comparison between these two. Again, thank you, Nima. Thank you, Israel. You guys have helped this channel immensely, and you guys know it. I think that's going to wrap it up, guys. Visit the t-shirt shop if you want to pick up one of those balance tees down below, or a balance sweatshirt. They're great for the winter. Thank you very much for that. For those of you who have purchased, which is more than I expected, so thank you. If you guys like my videos, definitely hit that subscribe button for upcoming videos. And if you really like this one, you want to see some more of my ugly face, go ahead and visit some of the older reviews on this channel. And until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.